Chapter 6. Find Your Cause. In 1963, Jewish philosopher and writer Hannah Arendt, who had fled Germany as Hitler came to power, coined the phrase banality of evil in her reporting on the trial of Adolf Eichmann. The term banal means obvious and boring, something that is unremarkable. One of the principal architects of the Holocaust, the balding, bespectacled Eichmann, looked more like an everyday bank clerk than an executioner responsible for genocide. He claimed to have no particular hatred for Jews. In fact, he insisted he had been just obeying orders as he helped design the final solution to murder millions of innocent men, women, and children. Often, evil looks more like Eichmann than a madman screaming hatred. Evil can wear a nurse's coat, a lawyer's suit, or a minister's robe. Evil can come softly, just as Lucifer himself can masquerade as an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:14. The greatest injustices can be presented as justice, and the greatest lies as truth. Evil can stand as a ruling of justice, handed down by the highest court of one of the freest countries in the world. In the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, 7 U.S. Supreme Court justices, all men, ruled that abortion was a constitutional right for women. Their ruling would dramatically alter American life. In the decades that followed, while abortion was presented as the wise and even compassionate solution to problems, it is estimated that more than 60 million children were killed in utero. Decades earlier, a seemingly ordinary, middle-class American activist named Margaret Sanger founded an institution that would lead the industry responsible for killing more innocent people than any 20th century genocidal regime. Sanger's creation, what would become the billion-dollar corporation known today as Planned Parenthood, now commits nearly half the nation's abortions. Currently, that means they are responsible for killing nearly 1,000 children in America every day. A proud eugenicist and a matter-of-fact dehumanizer, Sanger viewed herself and her allies as champions of progress and women's rights. She would not have been a champion of a family like mine. The most merciful thing that the large family does to one of its infant members, Sanger said unashamedly, is to kill it. Taking its cue from its founder, Planned Parenthood would go on to kill millions of American children and advocate against every single proposed abortion restriction. Yet many Americans today rarely think about abortion or consider it evil. Similarly, during Hitler's regime, most Germans failed to see the evil around them, much less stand against it. The few who did recognize the evil of the Nazis and spoke out against them were brutally silenced. Appalled by her government's treatment of Jews, 21-year-old student Sophie Scholl resisted by distributing anti-Nazi literature at the University of Munich. For this simple act of defiance, Sophie was arrested and promptly beheaded. Other would-be resistors got the message. Speaking the truth about evil comes at a great cost. Exposing darkness is still a high-risk endeavor in any country, even in the United States, where freedom of speech is both prized and protected by the First Amendment. It's one thing to look back on history and imagine that the genocides of the 20th century were unique to those who committed them, or that we might have seen things differently if we had lived in that time and place. However, it is folly to think we are somehow wiser than past generations. We share the same rooted human nature as our ancestors. To avoid making the same errors as generations past, we must study those errors and learn from them. We need to pay attention to what is happening around us and be alert to the evils we may have become blind to. God willing, future generations may view abortion in much the same way as we view slavery and the Holocaust. In my teens, I cared about many causes, from ending homelessness and helping earthquake victims overseas to caring for those with disabilities. But I could not forget the images I had seen of children killed by abortion, any more than I could forget the ultrasound image of Katerina inside my mother's womb. And the contrast between the images was stark. It weighed on me, and I tried to think of ways I could make a difference. As I came to see, abortion has taken more lives than any other injustice in our history. I sensed, too, that our spiritual survival as a civilization hinged on whether we allowed the bloodshed to continue. A series of events, starting with the book I read when I was 9, convinced me that my cause should be life itself. I was 11 when a friend and I decided to write a public letter to the adults in our community, asking them to vote for life in the next election. I typed it up on my parents' desktop computer and printed out a few dozen copies, which took almost an hour because our printer was so slow. We are only 11 and 14, and not old enough to vote for life. But you are, the letter began. We taped the letter to the walls outside our local supermarket and pharmacy. It felt like a shot in the dark, and it was a one-time deal. Elections only happened every few years, and I estimated that maybe a few hundred people would even see it. What else could I do? I wanted to join a pro-life group and get more involved, but despite asking around and researching online, I could only find one in San Jose. I was busy with school and extracurricular activities, and time went by. 2 years later, I discovered through the community pregnancy center that there was a small group of people who met outside an abortion facility in San Jose every Saturday to pray and offer resources to women entering the facility. I learned that through their faithful presence outside the clinic and their sincere offers of help, they were able to persuade dozens of women to cancel their abortion appointments and choose life for their babies. After negotiating with my parents for permission, I arranged with a couple of friends to go to the clinic one Saturday. One of my friends, Dev, had his driver's license and got permission to drive me and another friend to the clinic. I had printed out materials about the local pregnancy center to hand to any woman willing to take them. We all made small talk as we drove, nervous about what the day might be like. We parked a few blocks away. As we walked to the clinic, I marveled at how ordinary the neighborhood seemed. A children's daycare was across the street, next to a YMCA. Cars drove by and families dropped off their little ones right across the street from Planned Parenthood's abortion clinic, one of the several abortion centers in San Jose. This multi-story brick building towered over the street. Its reflective windows prevented curious eyes from looking in, and a fence kept protesters at bay. Little did I know at the time how large Planned Parenthood would loom in my life. At the time, though, I marveled that this building had been there, standing throughout my entire childhood, just 15 miles away from my house, and I had not known about it. This clinic killed preborn children between the ages of 7 weeks and 24 weeks. At only 3.5 weeks, a child's heart has begun to beat. By 7 weeks, their arms and legs are already beginning to form. Some babies could survive at just 22 weeks with medical support. Entering into that clinic, every child within a mother's womb had a beating heart and a future. Each was as precious and as holy as any other human on earth. At the front of the clinic, we met up with Gary, a tall, gray-bearded man in his 40s with a kind face. I would learn later that before Gary's conversion, he and his girlfriend got pregnant and had a child together. When she got pregnant a second time, Gary told her, "It's your problem. You take care of it." She had the abortion. Years later, Gary went to a pro-life talk that shared our need to be saved from arson by Christ. Deeply grieved that he had encouraged the killing of his own child, Gary asked God for forgiveness. The love and forgiveness of Christ radically changed Gary's life. Filled with hope that he could help others after Christ had transformed his own life, Gary would spend decades praying and offering resources and care to women outside abortion clinics. I had gotten in touch with Gary through my friend Francesca from the pregnancy center. Although I had spoken with Gary on the phone, I had never met him. Francesca told me Gary was there every Saturday and was sometimes joined by friends or elderly ladies from a local Catholic church who prayed the rosary. Standing outside the clinic, Gary greeted us warmly. "I'm so glad you three are here," he said happily, then added quietly, "It's a busy day today." We watched as cars drove into the parking lot next to the building and parked. A young girl exited the passenger door of a white Suburban. The driver, who looked as if she could have been the girl's mother, stepped out beside her. The girl's face was crumpled, her eyes filled with tears. Her mother looked stoic. Gary called out over the short fence, "You don't have to do this. There are people who want to help you." A heavy-set, bearded man with gray hair, wearing a bright orange vest that read "Escort," walked quickly over to the women. "Don't listen to what he's saying," the escort said loudly. "Just walk away." As he hurried the woman across a lot to the back door of the building, Gary's voice called after them, "We're here to help you. We love you and your baby." The girl and her mother disappeared into the building. Car after car drove into the parking lot. The women were driven by boyfriends, husbands, mothers, sisters, friends. Some drivers dropped off the women and kept going. Other drivers remained in their cars. Still others accompanied the pregnant young women into the clinic. As each person approached the building, Gary called out, offering help and resources. My friends and I stood next to Gary on the sidewalk, praying quietly. I knew that a dozen yards or so away from me, behind the brick and steel, was an operating room. Each of these women entered that room nurturing a baby within. The abortionist would enter soon after and would tear that baby, that precious life, into pieces. He did it legally. There was no one to stop it. It was a woman's right, even if the woman was just a young girl who may or may not have been coerced into being there. After some time, the number of cars slowed and no more young women came. Quietly, my friends and I walked back to the car. I didn't know what to say or do at that moment. I had seen death and hopelessness play out right in front of me, and I had little power to prevent any of it. The world did not seem to care. We were quiet as we started the drive home. After a few minutes, Dev said, "Want to stop at In-N-Out?" I looked at him, unsure of what to say. How could we go and eat hamburgers after watching dozens of women enter a building where their preborn children would die? How could we go about doing anything normal? It wasn't that my friend didn't care. Going to get lunch was a perfectly normal thing to do. But after being so close to so much pain, despair, and death, I knew I'd never be the same. I may not have accomplished much that day on the sidewalk, but the experience changed me. I began to think seriously about devoting my life to pro-life work. Unlike other abuses such as sex trafficking or child abuse, abortion was legal. In a nation that claimed to defend basic human rights, beginning with the right to life, these children were being killed with the explicit permission of the law and at the request of their own mothers. These children had no way to defend themselves. In the womb, they were totally dependent on their mothers, unable to even cry out for help. Among the victims of all the injustices throughout the world, babies are the most powerless, and there was no ignoring the staggering death toll. At the time, more than 1 million children were being killed every year in the United States alone. Worldwide, the number was closer to 50 million each year. The sheer number of lives lost daily eclipsed any other single cause of death for human beings. The reality was undeniable. The world was turning a blind eye to the legal murder of more than 100,000 defenseless children every day. It's been said that a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. As horrifying as that statement is, it also makes a point. It is possible to become numb to evil in high numbers. Coming to grips with this, I came to see abortion as the greatest human rights abuse of our time. The first right of every human being is the right to life. The U.S. Declaration of Independence states that every human being is endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The right to life comes first, preceding the rights to liberty and the pursuit of happiness. If we do not protect that first right, no other rights matter. Other injustices can be righted. Other abuses can be stopped. Other wounds can be healed. For the child who endures abortion, there is no righting, no stopping, no healing. Baby is either dead or alive. Once he or she is killed, there is no way to restore baby's rights. An abortion cannot be undone. As I grew in my devotion to Christ, my faith also guided me to focus on the pro-life cause. Beyond the prohibition against murder, the Bible is full of verses that acknowledge the humanity and sacredness of a child in the womb. In the Psalms, King David praised God for the mystery of creation. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. Psalm 139, verse 13 through 14. The Didache, a catechism for early Christians in the first 3 centuries of the Church, explicitly prohibits abortion. Didache. The Bible also provides strong exhortations for our responsibility to help those in need. James reminds us, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to care for orphans and widows in their distress. James 1:27. What child is more orphaned than the one who is in danger of abortion? I was also struck by Jesus' statement, truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. Matthew 25:45. A child in the womb in danger of abortion is certainly among the least of these. There are many causes that need our attention and that are worthy of our concern. But the greatest need in our era is ultimately spiritual. Jesus is thirsting for our love, said Mother Teresa, and this is the thirst of everyone, poor and rich alike. Before truly committing to a cause, I had to ask myself, as we all should, where is the need the greatest? Who most needs the advocacy, but has the least support? Where is the suffering the most profound, both physically and spiritually? And what immediate difference could I make? In choosing a cause, we have to be wary of those causes that may appear attractive, but which can be ultimately destructive. A cause can be well-intentioned, but become destructive when it is based on an incomplete or incorrect understanding of the human person. Take, for example, the cause of Marxism. In high school, my friend Jacob decided he was a Marxist after reading the Communist Manifesto. Communism was Karl Marx's great cause. Jacob and I had long talks about it. He even sewed onto his favorite burgundy sweatshirt the Soviet Communist insignia, the hammer and sickle, which represented sympathy with the proletariat or working men. We'd walk around the community college campus, or we took some of our high school classes, like 2 young revolutionaries, dreaming about a utopian future. We weren't that unique in our exploration of Marxism. Many young people are attracted to the idealistic promises of communism and socialism. When I first read the Communist Manifesto, I found parts of it inspiring. The ideal that we are all brothers and sisters responsible for one another was appealing. So was the idea that the worker had dignity. Although Marx did not live long enough to see what would happen to his ideal, Jacob and I had no excuse for our ignorance except for our youth. As I learned over time, communism almost inevitably produces leaders such as Lenin and Stalin and Mao, and results in forced labor camps, political assassinations, religious oppression, elimination of free speech, confiscation of private property, and the murder of millions of innocent people. If there was ever a destructive cause, this was one. Karl Marx had attempted to build his utopia on a faulty foundation. He thought that human beings, not God, were the ultimate source of morality. In fact, for Marx, there was no God. He viewed human beings not as free individuals with inherent dignity, but as cogs in a class system who were constantly at war with one another. In other words, Marx was a materialist, reducing the human person to matter and failing to recognize their moral agency. Marx's fatal mistake was to misunderstand both human nature and God. Another false cause that has led to great evil over the last century is eugenics, the belief that we can improve the human condition by controlling who gets to have children. This movement rejects the dignity of human beings, viewing the sick, the poor, those deemed racially inferior, and the disabled as unfit members of the population whose very existence should be prevented. In the United States, this movement reached its peak of acceptance in 1927. In the now infamous case, Buck versus Bell, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that Carrie Buck, a white woman from Virginia, was mentally defective and thus could be forcefully sterilized. By court decree and against her will, doctors forcibly operated on her, tying her fallopian tubes so that she would not be able to bear children. It is better for all the world, wrote famed liberal Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. Today, many use similar reasoning to argue for abortion. It's better for a poor or disadvantaged woman to choose abortion so that her child won't grow up poor or disadvantaged. Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger approved wholeheartedly of this philosophy. Her goal, after all, was to grasp utopia from the skies and plant it on earth. In her rejection of God, however, Sanger was forever improving what form her utopia should take. Whatever form it took, her utopia would have no place for the mentally defective, which in her writings included the poor, the disabled, essentially all African Americans, and most of the people of color. She argued that preventing defective from being born was the height of compassion. Eugenics remained hugely popular in the Western world until Adolf Hitler put his principles into action and people saw only too clearly where those principles led. Sadly, many people today still hold eugenics ideals without even realizing it. For example, children with disabilities are routinely killed before birth because they are deemed unfit. Using the same justification as many eugenicists of the past, proponents of aborting babies with a prenatal diagnosis argue that it is more compassionate to kill them than to let them live with their disability or to die naturally of a life-threatening condition. Parents are often encouraged to get prenatal screenings of their children so they can abort a child who has a genetic disorder or physical defects. In the United States, this has resulted in the selective abortion of an estimated 40% of all preborn Down syndrome babies. In Iceland, that figure approaches 100%. I understand the pressure, especially on my generation, by some powerful institutions to join false causes. Many major corporations, media groups, tech companies, and much of our education establishments promote the legalized killing of children in the womb as a crucial cause. For women, it's why doing our homework is just as important as opening our hearts. My cause was to fight for life. Abortion was an injustice I could do something about. I could educate my peers, I could raise money for pregnancy resource centers, I could be a silent witness outside abortion facilities. Nothing held me back from helping at least one young woman who struggled with an abortion decision. Nothing held me back from trying to save at least one life. How many other causes allow an ordinary individual to directly help save a life? If you know what breaks your heart, if you discover who your heroes are, if you're confident in what you believe, and if you have examined the facts to avoid going down a misguided path, you will be well positioned to find your cause. Remember, your existence at this particular time in human history is no accident. The gifts and talents you have are not random. Although the work we do and the talents we have may not initially appear to be a perfect match to the myriad needs and problems of the world, applying our gifts and service to others is part of what we have been made for. Aligning our talents to address the needs around us is a struggle that refines and strengthens us. It helps us grow into the men and women God created us to be. To refuse to struggle, to refuse to try, is to refuse to grow. When we open our eyes to the greatest evils of our day, we become alert to the suffering and injustice they inflict. There we will find many causes waiting to be championed by those willing to fight.